Welcome back to the $1 million Tipping Point podcast. Just as a reminder for all our listeners, if you could sign up for the Tipping Point of Wisdom email or newsletter group, you'll get lots of good tips every week on how to grow your business. And you'll be part of a wonderful community of women who are ambitious and looking to grow their business as well. So today on our show, we have Sarah Milby. She is the founder and CEO of Valor Performance, Inc., an enterprise software company that supports some of the highest performing global organizations in strategically igniting the best in every leader, manager, and team. Delivered through its high-tech, high-touch digital platform, Valor provides the skills, analytics, and coaching for professionals to stay on top of their game, even under pressure. Prior to starting Valor, Sarah was an entrepreneur in residence at F Prime Capital Partners. She also launched Grokker's enterprise division as VP of Business Development and Partnerships and led health plan relationships for Castlight Health from startup through its IPO in 2014. Sarah has a Yale University BA, a Harvard Kennedy School of Government MPA, and a Stanford University Graduate School of Business MBA. Sarah's experiences as a business leader and athlete give her the inspiration and conviction to start Valor, dedicated to supporting and igniting the best in every leader, team, and organization. So again, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I do want to throw out a little disclaimer. Sarah and I know each other. We have actually worked together for, what year are we in? 2022. Okay, we've worked together for 5 years now. Yes. And I have been her executive assistant and watched Valor grow from a little company to, I mean, it's still a startup, but it's quite large compared to when I first started working with you. We only had like 3 employees.
Moving in the right direction. Yes, you were one of my first, actually.
Yes. So I want to kind of go back. When did you actually start Valor and how did your sports background play into this?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question on when did I start it, because it's like based on what, when I legally incorporated was 2017. When we officially launched the product, it was 2018. But when did the idea start to marinate in my mind? It was years in the making, because I started Valor out of my own personal experience. So you did reference my sports background. I played soccer in college, and then I got into competitive running, and played a ton of sports just growing up. And I was always given coaches to help me be at my best. And sometimes the coaches were, what you probably are thinking of right now, like, okay, in soccer, dribbling and shooting. Mm-hmm. But I was actually totally serendipitously connected to someone who helped work on more the mental skills. Like, his name was Paul, and he helped me think about, like, how do I stay confident even when I was frankly intimidated by some of the other players on the field? How did I, see opportunity and challenge, like if I got injured? How did I stay kind of grounded and present in the moment instead of letting all like the chatter that was happening in my mind get the best of me? And after sport, when I got into working world, and I've worked in different sectors, I started out actually as a teacher for Teach for America, and then I got into finance.
I didn't know that.
And then, I always wanted to have like impact, and I found that was at the time, I was just so eager just to kind of get thrown in to having impact and working with people who didn't have as many of the opportunities that I had growing up. So, but anyway, when I worked in these different sectors, and you mentioned a few when I got into the tech and startup world, I was put in a lot of like one-time leadership workshops. Like, okay, you're now a manager, go attend this all-day training. And it's not to say that they weren't valuable. It's just, they weren't lasting. There was no like ongoing development. And the thing about leadership, and especially for me, is I was just faced with constantly new situations, just trying to navigate things in work and life, was I needed a constant kind of like ally, someone in my corner to help be a sounding board and give me some like strategies on what I was facing. And so it was just hard to kind of like reference back to something that happened like 6-8 months ago in one conference room. So anyway, I just started becoming kind of obsessed with this idea of why not have a coach? And there's executive coaches for a lot of C-suite executives, but what about for rising leaders, or for the layer down? And I was working at these tech companies that were all about using software and technology to foster behavior change and to scale companies. And so it's kind of like, well, wait, if we're doing it over here, why can't we bring that same approach to coaching and leadership development? And so it was kind of all of those different components together that got me just sort of thinking about what is now Valor.
And to talk a little bit about Valor, you have coaches that are Olympians in the company, which is really interesting. And was that one of your original ideas, to get these all-star athletes and get them to work for Valor? And how did you even convince them that this was a good thing for them to invest their time into?
So that came about because a lot of my experience, I was looking for something that was going to have the skills and strategies around like performance and leading during pressure, as you mentioned. And so leaned heavily on performance psychology, and 90% of our coaches have advanced degrees in performance psychology or related fields. And that whole idea of like, how do you perform under pressure? How do you know like the science of performance? And some of these principles are just universal. So outside of sport, in any high pressure competitive environment. And so I actually started with, there was like a hand-picked group of 5 coaches. I'm based in Boston, and they were in the Boston area. I think most of them, most of that 5 were in the Boston area. And they were all with backgrounds in either counseling or performance and sports psych. And then I started thinking about, well, wait a second, there's some element of like, why is this so interesting? It's because it's like, it's inspiring and it's relatable. And so I started thinking about, well, what if we also brought in these experienced high performers in their own right and help give them some of the coaching skills and give them some of these frameworks? Could they also be great Valor coaches? And it was a hypothesis that if you did do that, and if you surrounded them with the right mentorship and access to what we have on like the Valor platform for coaches, that it would be really compelling. And so we did. We ended up partnering with Team USA and NBA and WNBA and the G League, which is part of the NBA. And we started just recruiting these pro athletes and Olympians and Paralympians. And then they went through what we called Valor Academy. And our head of coaching at the time, Dr. Adam Naylor, helped train them and give them skills. And what's really exciting is that the ones who realized that they wanted coaching to be their craft, and they really wanted coaching to be their next career, and those who haven't really invested in it, they're still a part of Valor. They're actually, they've been rising in the ranks of our tiered coach community. And they do walk the walk. And that's what's so beautiful, is if you think of our coach community, there's, yes, coaching skills, there's the expertise of the science of performance and leadership, but then there's also the element of being experienced high performers. And I think that is really interesting, because not only do I love them, and I use the word love because the coach community they are very much, they're our community, they're our teammates, and they bring a lot of Valor to life for our clients. The other thing that's so exciting though is that they can help translate how many of these principles are universal. So whether it's in, tech and software, working with executives, or healthcare, working with physician leaders, finance, athletics, elite military, so much of these principles are the same. And that garners a lot of curiosity amongst our clients, which is the key ingredient to have some of the industry leading engagement rates that we have.
What has been harder for you, trying to trying to recruit coaches in the beginning, because you're talking about like you're dropping like, oh, the NBA, WNBA, like, oh yeah, no problem. We just were able to convince people to, come with us and partner with us. So was that harder, or was it getting clients in the beginning and convincing them that, this is really like something that your team needs in order to, elevate their performance?
In the beginning, well, I guess it's kind of been the same, where the client side just took and still takes sometimes more education. It's more of like a consultative type of conversation with clients, because this is sort of shifted with COVID, but unfortunately, like the modern workforce, there's so many elements that are just focused on like just squeezing out more and more efficiency, and sometimes squeezing out the humanity of the modern workforce. And I think with COVID, we started to see like, hang on, human performance and like how we treat our top talent, and how do we give them support and a solution that gives them skills to develop and take them to the next level is critical. But in the early days, like it was not obvious. And even still, sometimes we end up in conversations with clients that want like a, guarantee that we will drive performance at their organization. And so you sort of see in the conversations that we have which companies are and leaders are really living out their values. And if they do care about their people and want to invest in them and want to reward and ensure that they feel valued even outside of compensation through development. Many of the rising generations are demanding this type of support and development. But that's always kind of taken us some time to like formulate and to get the traction. Now, what ends up happening when I was building my business was you get the early like adopters, right? So the early evangelists that do care about their people, and they do want to develop them and support them. And they do see like where there's a power in coaching also for like their own time. Like, hey, I wish I could coach everybody on my team, but like, I'm so busy too. So like, you're probably better suited to do it as a third party with the expertise that you have and access to all these global coaches. Anyway, I think that helps build a lot of the fodder and like excitement and case studies and reference clients that then lead you to the next set of clients. And so, you end up in a buyer's journey and in like a company's journey, you get to more like skeptical buyers as you go. You start with like the early evangelists, and then they help kind of make the case to those who may be a little bit more on the fence. And then as you go, you get even more refined and kind of the ROI of what you're offering. The supply side, by the way, just sorry to go back to that, has not been a pain point for us. I'd say that our approach, we do very much treat our coaches as a community and part of the company. So 48% of the coaches who we end up hiring actually come from referral from within the coach community. Okay. So the thing is, and similar to employees, right? Like when you take care of your team and then they start talking about it, and then they bring in some of their colleagues that they, also respect and want to have a part of what you're building, it feeds itself. So our coach community, we receive about 10 applications a week.
Oh, wow.
But yes, but we're not always actively bringing on more coaches. So in a good way, that helps us keep the caliber of our coach community high. And also it gives us a good foundation for when we do need to bring on more coaches.
Now you have this whole, I don't know if it's an app, but you have like a whole software that you've developed that people go through, and they go through like courses and they talk with their coaches. Did you make that internally, or did you get that made by a third party?
Yeah, good question. So my founding story, so it is all internal. It's all Valor. the software platform in which you connect, you schedule, you can message with your coach, you can go through these guided, self-directed mini learning and courses, access to a library, access to a 360 feedback product that we call Valor Viewpoints. It's all Valor owned. In the early days, what my founding story, and actually it was probably it was right before we met, was I had taken this idea of like my story, you know, the like why not have a coach and focus on some of these like mental skills that help you have, you know, be able to lead during times of change and pressure. And I started having just some conversations to get potential customer insights, like feedback. So I had worked with a designer to have some, what I thought were beautiful slides, just a few like overview slides, you know, just to start a conversation. And I would just get feedback, like, would you, you know, what, is this something that you struggle with? Like, how do you think about, you know, helping your team perform, but not burning them out? How do you think about motivating them when you can't do that all the time? Like, you can't be there all the time for your team. And make a long story short, we ended up pre-selling. So meaning like, and I can picture actually where it was in Boston at a coffee shop when I was walking through these slides, just getting feedback. And this gentleman said, if you build that, yeah, I would buy it. Do you want to send over just a contract and we'll like sign it to commit to purchasing once you build it? And by the way, I had no legal counsel at the time, or maybe I did have a legal counsel, but I definitely didn't have a contract. I definitely didn't have a bank account, of which if they were going to send me any money, like would I know what to do with it? And I was like, oh, okay, I think this is happening. And then I kind of used that like initial client, who was going to be bringing Valor to his team. They were going through a ton of org changes. And so he really wanted to bring something to help kind of like stabilize the team, and like in the uncertainty, just giving them a coach in their corner that has a lot of these skills to manage like pressure, was right up his alley. So anyway, I used that to then go to 2 other organizations to say, hey, I'm going to do this alpha launch in October. It was like, I think maybe March of that year. I said, I'm going to do this alpha launch. We have a third already committed, so I'm only looking for 2 other customers to be a part of it. Do you want in? And we ended up getting 3 of those alpha customers, at which point I was actually looking for a co-founder at the time. I didn't set out to be a founder, but now I had pre-sold and I had like commitments and to build this thing that I just had some slides on. And so that led me to finding a development shop to help build the software aspect. And then again, I was recruiting these like 5 handpicked coaches to kind of be in that initial launch. And so like had to. And then once we were doing that launch, I was still recruiting and looking for full-time employees. And so my first employee was an engineer to help take the software from this dev shop to like now translating it all into like Valor, as we launched these first 3 initial customers. And then in parallel, I was fundraising to like keep building, but that's a story. That's another story if you want to dig into that later.
Yeah, it's kind of like necessity breeds invention. You know what I mean? It's like you were just going out there with these slides, and then all of a sudden people wanted it, and you're like, oh, well, okay, shoot, I got to figure this out.
Exactly. And I would say that the other thing that I just always go back to, why do I do this? And so much of my why is like, because I was at these companies without a coach. I was like, I wanted Valor. And frankly, by the way, I started Valor out of my own personal experience, but I use Valor so much in running the company. Like, not only do I have a coach, but like I have the benefit of surrounding myself with people who love to talk about frameworks around leadership, leading during change. How do you lead yourself? Self-awareness, emotional regulation, confidence. Like, I surround myself with people who talk about these things. So and thank the heavens I do, because I need it so much. But also just to say, I think like so much, I'm just so wired to go to customers to like get kind of that feedback, because one thing that I've learned about myself that I value in the work that I do is just helping people. And like, you know, I was not alone. That's the thing. And like all my customer conversations, or what became customer conversations, it was just validating that my experience, I was not isolated. Like this was just a very common situation in the modern workforce of not having access to some of these like principles of how emotional intelligence can help you connect with your colleagues. You know, like you're not always given some of these skills and some of the support. So that also has just always kind of been a good anchor for me to go back to, is why I do what I do is because of the customer and the client, the recipient of Valor, user, we don't use that term, but the employee who gets Valor. That's why I do what I do. And so that's kind of like even how my story started, is just going to that customer. And then that forced me to take action on the other steps.
So let's talk a little bit about hiring, because you have quite a few coaches now at this point, 5 years in. You have quite a few employees, a lot more than when I first started. And who was your first hire? And it sounds like you started hiring right away. It was like, oh, well, you guys want to see this product, so I guess I have to start hiring. Did that, I mean, I think you've grown quite rapidly in 5 years. Have you made any mistakes when hiring?
Yes, yes, and yes. So yeah, first two hires, one engineer, one in customer success, and then one part-time VA. And so much of why it was those first hires has to do with who I am and my skills. So I think, you know, the way I thought about it, the way I still think about it is, you know, it's a, like a team is like a living and breathing thing, and each person, or maybe like it's like an orchestra, and so like all different instruments, right? And I know which instruments I'm good at. And so for me, like you just heard some of my founding story and some of my background, I love the customer facing. So like the sales aspect of founder-led sales was like going to be part of my strength. And so, but I knew that I was going to need, like, I don't know engineering. I don't have a technical background. I didn't have a technical co-founder. So I knew I was going to need an engineer. And then also if I was going to sell, well, then who was going to help take care of those customers and ensure that they got all the value along the way and like getting them set up for success. So I knew I was going to need customer success. And then there's a ton of things in starting a business, as you know, that are so like all of the admin and the ops and some of the like back end things that also were not where I needed to be focused for the business. And so hence why I was so lucky to find you.
Which, by the way, is surprising. Most people do not hire an assistant right away. They wait until they're like at their very last straw and they are about to like, you know, crack. So it was surprising.
Yeah. And I get that. I think for me, I wanted to stay lean, right? And I also, again, knew where I got my energy. And I needed to find compliments. Like if at those early days, well, and even now, it's not even just those early days. Energy management is just like, it's everything, right? Because you want to have your energy for the things that you care most about in your life. That's why I don't love time management. It's more just energy management. And so like for me, I like, just to speak about our relationship, like, you know, put me with a customer and like, I get such energy. I love talking about what we do. I love hearing about what's going on with their company. You know, scheduling like to take a train to meet all these different clients, or setting up a system to make sure that all some of these components of the processes that you have to do with a business, like that stuff kind of drives me crazy. And what's still kind of bizarre to me is that people like you love that stuff. So why not find someone who's like so good at it, loves it, and can help then me focus on where, frankly, the business needs me to focus. Mm-hmm. And some of that was like with the customers, but some of it was also hiring. So to get to your other question, I for sure have made mistakes, for sure. And I think the biggest one that I'd say, and it's like kind of classic startup, I guess, is we've always run Valor very capital efficient. So we've been fairly lean. And so by the time we are like, it is so crystal clear, we need to make the investment on hiring another FTE or even hiring a contractor part-time, what have you. We're usually like popping at the seams. Mm. And so the challenge and the risk there is you're just like, you know, almost like desperately, you're like, okay, well, like, can you just like breathe? Great. Okay. Off to a good start, you know, but like holding yourself accountable. And I've learned this the hard way too, is like holding yourself accountable to like, it's the whole take time to be efficient. Like take the time up front to be thoughtful on like the criteria in which you're looking for, the like rubric in which you're going to make the decision, who needs to weigh in, who is the decision maker, what's going to be the whole process, where are you going to be posting, and all of that like is one of those that sometimes you're like, oh, I don't want to put all that stuff together. But it's almost guaranteed that then when you maybe hire someone who's not the right person for that role, you're going to be spending a lot of time cleaning that up.
Yeah. So it's almost like you rush the hiring process because you're bursting at the seams and you just want someone in there so badly.
Yeah. And it's really hard to say, you know what, I think I think we need to keep looking. It's really hard. It's really
I know
hard.
Sometimes your hiring has gone on a few months and that's got to be tough.
It's so tough because that means that someone else is, again, you've now made it so crystal clear you need that spot. And that means someone else is holding those responsibilities. And so each time you say, like, we got to keep looking, like, let's, you know, let's post it in more channels, you know, let's revisit this in 2 weeks. It's brutal. You like feel the pain, you know, but it's one of those of like, which would you rather? Because I think now having experienced the pain on the other side, when it's not a good fit, mm-hmm. It's not any less painful. So you'd rather, you know, when you bring someone on, oh yeah, this is a great fit. And this is going to be a game changer for the company.
And one thing I think you're really good at is knowing when to look at a position and say, but do we really need this? And maybe this comes from, you know, making a mistake, but, you know, saying, do we really need this position? Can we split up the responsibilities? And that, I know you did that with, maybe operations. I'm not sure, but like, you know, now I handle some of the HR onboarding stuff. Yep. Now the accounting team handles some other stuff. And someone else, CFO, maybe handles some payroll stuff. Like, so it's like you split up one role between 3 people and that kind of helps you stay lean, like you were talking about, yes. And not maybe make a mistake with a role that's not needed at this point.
You know, it's actually a fairly recent, I'll say, lesson that I've been trying to practice, which is not just copy paste either what other companies do or what, like in air quotes, what I should do, or what I did before. Like, okay, this role is what I had before, and just like forcing myself to say, what does the business need now? Because again, it's a living and breathing thing. It's like growing. So like what I needed last year for a certain aspect of the business may be totally different. And that's absolutely been the case. And so just like the example you said too, which is like, sometimes the answer is, well, gosh, actually, if we split this up and maybe instead of hiring like certain FTEs, maybe I can find a great part-time person, and just like, you know, asking yourself those questions of what the real solution, what the options could be for the solution, it also frees you up to know that it's not like you're not walking on a tightrope. There's like things that there's different options that you have as you grow and that are at your disposal as you think about hiring your team.
What happened during COVID and having to move excuse me, Ross, edit that, please. What happened during COVID and having to move completely remote? I mean, you already had some experience. You had work from home days that you have your whole contractor. I mean, not even contract, the coaches, they're all remote. Yeah. But how did it work when you moved remote with the entire team? How do you keep that culture strong? Because Valor is so, you guys really emphasize culture a lot. So how did you navigate that? And do you think, as an additional question, do you think COVID was good to your business, either with clients and also when in regards to the Valor team?
Great questions. So with COVID, you're exactly right. As far as we already had a bunch of distributed teammates. So our coach community, we already had some folks for Valor HQ that weren't in the greater Boston area. Mm-hmm. And so we already had to kind of get more savvy with just some of our business operations and practices. And actually what was really nice, just as far as your second question as it relates to Valor, our team, was a couple of things. One is, I think because of those processes, and what was kind of nice was everybody was remote. So like it went from, there's kind of this nucleus of HQ and then some distributed colleagues, like everybody was a tile on the Zoom screen in a way that was like kind of nice and like leveled everybody. So I think the business processes, like we didn't face a ton of challenge. We'd always been software enabled. And so like our whole platform is set up that way. So there was that, but I'd say like for the culture, the things that I learned was like what worked. This is like fairly obvious now, hindsight, but I'll still share because it wasn't obvious at the time, was like what worked for solidifying our culture in person. Just, you can't like copy paste into Zoom. So for instance, like we had Friday lunches. We would always have lunch together Fridays, like, hey, noon to 1, if like whatever you're doing, like you're going to find some Valor folks in the kind of like the cafe area of where we worked. And so like when we first went remote, I like still did that. And it was like on Zoom, and like, it was so awkward, and it totally backfired. Cause like, it was just weird to like stare at your screen while people are like chewing, and like nobody wanted to talk, and everyone was like looking for someone to like, it just wasn't like the same like vibe. And so it forced us to think about how do we be more intentional with our culture? And, you know, you have to feed it. And you have to think through like, what is our values? How do we want our values of our organization to drive our like norms and practices and how we interact? And I think like my biggest learning over these past few years, and frankly, it's a huge shout out to a lot of the Valor coaches who were just such incredible thought partners for us as we were experiencing what a lot of our clients were experiencing, was being intentional and fostering those conversations, and not just, you know, taking it for granted or letting it kind of potentially like die on the vine sort of thing. And I think it's been hard. Like I've just learned a ton to like also revisit what you thought were your values before. Like, is that what this team at this point of the journey, do we all agree with that? Would we change anything? And so kind of like holding it loosely. And I think especially as a founder, that has been a ton of learning for me, is like, it's ours. And so having co-creators of what the business environment, the culture would be like, is something that I've really appreciated, because it helps, like we all carry that and we all experience the culture. And so we all need to feed it and be a part of it. So that's been a ton of learnings. And I think again, during that time, I'm just so grateful, continually grateful for our coach community, Because the good news is we were all like, again, we're these like performance experts, but we were all experiencing like, man, how do you sustain your performance? What is your energy management like when so many things got turned upside down? So I'm grateful that we have the like humility to like talk about it ourselves as students of the work, but also that I could call them to get their input as to how to set up Valor for success during that time.
Mm. And do you think though that COVID was also good for your business? Because I mentioned earlier in the interview that you had a few like almost like struggles before where people were trying to squeeze their employees, and now there's a lot more awareness of it. So do you think that COVID like the pandemic helped with your business specifically?
I do. I think that people really realized like, wow, our like how important it is for human performance, like that our business, like turns out that businesses are made up of people, and these people are humans with like emotions and thoughts and behaviors and like, and their own motivations that may not align with their team's motivations, and like, they have their values and what they care about that may not align with the organization's. And like, it's just nuanced, and like there's just a lot of layers that go into that, and like team formation. And so I do think that a lot of what we've all experienced with being remote, but also the like burnout becoming much more of a discussion topic as opposed to like dare thou admit burnout,
Right.
I think it's become more of a topic of discussion. And the good news is that there are solutions like Valor and others that you can support your employees and give them skills to help them at work, to help them perform, to help them lead, to help them connect with their colleagues, and like to do better work. It's like, I always say like we're in the business of like it doesn't need to be mutually exclusive. It's not like, oh, performance at work or supporting your employees. Like you can live in the and that's like so beautiful. And so I mean, I'm obviously biased by my own experience and what I do, but I hope that more and more organizations are paying attention. And I think with like the Great Resignation, that was also like one of the topics is like, how do you retain this talent? Because the thing is like so much power went to top talent, because top talent is like, look, I could go anywhere. And so like, if you're not going to be an organization that either like is aligned with my values or invests in my development or gives me the flexibility that I need in my life right now, or that I want in my life right now, then like, I'll go somewhere else. So I think that there's this like, how do you attract, and then how do you retain that talent? But then also, how do you give them support to be more effective at their job?
You mentioned earlier about raising money. And I think our audience would be really interested in your experience with this, especially if someone has no understanding of Series A, B, C, pre-seed, all of that. Can you just walk us a little bit through your process and what it looked like for you raising money for Valor?
Sure. So just going back to my background, I had worked for a couple of venture-backed companies before. And that gave me kind of exposure to that world. And so, I was in the Bay Area, and I worked with these startups, and I got to know some of the investors from either like board meetings or just networking things. And so all to say is that I had that exposure. And when I moved to Boston and started to become obsessed with what is now Valor and just this whole, and I started to formulate the company, I had joined, and you mentioned this in my bio, I had joined actually a venture firm, F Prime Capital, which is tied to Fidelity, as an entrepreneur in resident. So what happened was, and actually it was really interesting just to share, when I was starting to think about like starting a business and I was excited about what is now Valor and this whole space, it was uncomfortable because, well, a couple of things. To tell you personally, I was moving across the country from the Bay Area to Boston because my fiance at the time, now my husband, was doing residency, medical training at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And I had always been very career driven. And so when we moved though, and I didn't have a job because I wanted to see if I could start something, like give myself a chance to do what I like dreamed of and what this whole experience that with Valor and coaching that I was really becoming obsessed with and excited about. But it was hard because I would meet new people and they kind of assumed I was like the trailing, fiance or something. And it was hard for me because I had this narrative of myself around just like career. And so it felt uncomfortable for me when people would say, oh, and like, what do you do? Or they'd say like, are you also a doctor? Like, what do you do? And I would say, oh, I'm going to start something.
No, gosh. Yeah, no, I'm like having that same feeling like, no, really, I'm worthy. I'm doing something too.
Totally. And it took a ton, and you know this, but I love courage. I named the company Valor, heroic courage after all. It took a ton of courage to like sit in the space that I was in, to know that I like, actually, I don't even want to go that far because I don't even know if I knew I was worthy, but to have the courage to say, I'm going to start something and just like close my mouth. No like excuses, no like, oh, but, and what ended up happening was in one of those conversations, and I can so picture it because I like was sweating. I was so nervous. I said to someone who I got to know from being in the digital health startup world before, I said to him, because he was seeing if I wanted to join one of the portfolio companies. And I said, no, I'm not going to take that role because I'm going to start something. And he's a venture capitalist and with F Prime. And he said, the classic next question, what are you going to start? And I said, I don't know. I have a few ideas. I don't know yet. And it was so uncomfortable. Like I'm actually sweating just thinking about it again. And it was in that, like living in that moment though, and that like discomfort, that's when what ended up happening was he came back and said, if you're going to start something, we'd like you to start it here as an EIR. We will put the, should you start something, we will put the initial money in to the business to support it. It wasn't guaranteed. They had to obviously like what I was starting. But they gave me a year to think through different business models and investment theses. And I wanted to share that part of the story because like if you just say, and then she became an EIR like at F Prime Capital, and like then they put money in, and that's like venture. It just like doesn't tell the real story of like what was so real for me, which was that like very uncomfortable moment of like choosing my like truth, if you will, of what I wanted to do in my life. And it was hard and it took courage, but then in a weird way, the universe like responded to that by like kind of stepping up. And so anyway, that is what ended up happening, is had a few different things I was thinking about, but obsessed with this passion of mine around coaching and leadership development and doing it through technology and software. F Prime did put that initial money in. And then that, as so many things, like even my client story that I was telling you about, they're stepping stones. And so that was a stepping stone to then go to other investors. And so bringing in one more venture firm, and then an angel syndicate, and then a couple individual angels into Valor to get it off the ground. So yeah, it's very much like stepping stones, and they play off of each other, as you can imagine.
But how does that work for those who don't understand, talking about like ownership of the company,
Sure.
The money that they're giving you, when do you have to pay it back? If you have to pay it back, or is it all just ownership? Can you just break that down simply?
Sure. So, well, It depends. But oftentimes when you're first raising money, it's like a convertible note. So it is, you can do it many ways though. I think like, I don't want to say that there's one way because there's so many different ways to get your business off the ground. I'll explain the way that I did it. The way that I did it was we had this, it was an agreement. It was giving ownership of the business for a certain amount of money. So essentially they like value your business, or they give an expected future value of the business, and then they'll give you an amount of money for a percent of the business. I guess that's like kind of a basic way to think about it. And so you know, really want to make sure that you're giving some of your business away to partners who are not only going to just be capital, because as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, sometimes you're just like, oh, that dollar sounds great, like sure,
yeah.
But the trade-off is now they own part of your business. And so to be very thoughtful about like who that is, and are they going to add value to the business outside of just that dollar amount? And that kind of goes back to the same thing on hiring, like knowing what you're good at, knowing where you could benefit from having someone strong at something, like thinking about them as complements to you and who you want to surround yourself. Because, and also going back to energy management, like this is going to be your, like, especially if they're investors, you can't fire them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess technically there's a couple ways of how you can get them out. But all's just to say, like, they can really make your life challenging. They can also bring a ton of value to your business, and they can absolutely be like founder friendly and help you along the way. I've been fortunate in who our investors are. So F Prime Capital has been great. Maverick Ventures has been great. The angel syndicates that I've worked with have been so supportive. But I also hear a ton of horror stories of the contrary. So it's, I think the thing that I would say, if anybody is thinking about just the raising money aspect, is it's always good to have options. And so like a couple ways to do that, right? Like one is creating a business with good fundamentals. What does that mean? Well, that you make more money than what you spend, kind of thing, business fundamentals that like you understand the drivers of your business. And so you have kind of some dials to play with. Like you may want to spend more than what you're making because you believe it's going to fuel more growth. But like making sure you're aware of the dials. And those are just like good business like principles. But then also having options of who's around the table, who could invest, who wants to invest. What are your options? Could you do a loan, could you do a small business loan? Could you do venture capital? There's so many options now, even from when I started Valor, of ways to even like almost like crowdsource funding for your business. That is really exciting, just the access to capital. And so I think the thing why that's exciting is because it gives entrepreneurs more options and therefore more control of their destiny.
Mm-hmm. How do you balance making money and spending money? Have you ever been nervous about cash flow with your business?
Always. My CFO is like, Sarah's always nervous about that, which is why I hired him to walk me off the ledge. Yeah, I mean, look, I think I mentioned being very lean. And so we've been very capital efficient. There's not a lot of like, fat to cut with Valor. Like each person does so much for the business. And so, but all is just to say, like, it's tight in that way. So if something doesn't go according to plan, like you have to course correct. So I often think about like the scenario planning. COVID actually, we talked about, was another good example, but I've sort of always run Valor this way of like, if then that. So in other words, like yeah, my best case is like, up and to the right growth, right? And then, but let's create some milestones after we like test a couple things or implement a couple strategies that then if they don't go according to plan, we can course correct. And like, what's the base case and what's the worst case? And like, honestly, with COVID, like I thought about number one, like, aligning to our organizational values. So like taking care of our teammates, taking care of our coach community, taking care of our customers. We did like a bunch of like free sessions for customers during that time because it was just challenging. So like aligning with those values. Like two is cash is king. And so like making sure that we were super tight with like, how our payment terms, like what expenses could we cut if we needed to, and then seeing the opportunity to like get creative with like some innovation. And actually we are currently still reaping the benefits from some, like I'll say, tests and experiments that we ran during COVID time that ended up being good for the business. There were a few that sort of flopped, but we used that time to kind of experiment. All is just to say, I think with scenario planning, it helps you think through like what's the, again, best case, base case, and worst case, as it relates to your top line and your expenses. But it's something that you also, again, going back to like, who's your team? I need someone who's teeing that up to me, and like I'm sitting down with that person going through it to make sure that I understand all that's going on in the business and the levers that we have at our fingertips, in order to course correct if we need to.
So do you think your best investment was your team?
Oh, that's like kind of a of course answer. I mean, yeah, a lot of our expenses is colleagues. Like we don't have, as I said, a lot of like other, things to cut, expenses wise. Like we don't have real estate anymore. We're all distributed. But no, it is our teammates. And so hence why like we carry a lot of water and we're so thoughtful before we bring on another FTE. I'd say the other thing, you mentioned this, I think it may be before we started recording, but is around like expenses that maybe you've been nervous about. And so with the people, I think it's been pretty clear, like when we need someone, because we're popping at the seams, like I said. The one that I am kind of embarrassed to admit is marketing, because it's one that you're like, yeah, but is it going to result in like deals? Like, I know that that's what you say.
Which is like what the clients are asking you sometimes. Like, are you going to like prove that your program is going to better our employees and they're going to bring in more sales? Like, you're doing the same thing. And I love it.
Totally. And it's like, I can't attribute this to that. And so, but so I think one of my like leadership lessons is, I think maybe being sales driven founder, I underinvested in the marketing machine of things. And like, we're so focused on like getting the product market fit right. And so, focused on the steak, maybe not enough sizzle. And so I've learned a ton, and like, I'm so grateful for, now Nate, but in general, the team that focuses on marketing and who has like pitched in. Like we've had like engineers and someone in coach ops like help out on marketing, because other people, I think, were like, Sarah, we should like do this. And now like, yeah, it's really exciting. It's really exciting because, it's demonstrating just the need and the demand for what we do. But I've learned a ton. And I think I was like very uneasy in the spend in the early days. The good news is the team is patient with my desire to test things. And so, doing a test, seeing the results. Okay, let's do a little bit more of that. And then seeing more results. That to me is kind of how I've started Valor, right? Like always wanting to verify and like test hypotheses before you pour a ton of money into something. But that's been really exciting, and it's been a great learning for me.
Do you think you faced any hurdles specifically as a woman when running and growing your business?
Oh, sure. I mean, I've had like my share of conversations that make me realize, whether it be clients, partners, investors, that that it would not be a good fit for me to work with them because of comments that they've made. But the thing is I have always wanted options, so I didn't have to. And I could just take my ball and go home, you know, and say like, okay, this is not going to be a good fit for us. And so I think that there's that. There's kind of like the bad apples out there that I feel fortunate I have been able to navigate away from, and have amazing partners and amazing clients and amazing investors that make me feel very, very supported as a CEO, a founder, as a woman, as a mom. So there's that. I'd say that the biggest challenge is just the realities of energy management. I, over the past few years, having started Valor, was like breathing life into this company as I wanted to start a family. And it was something that I really wanted. And, you know, I had, didn't know how long it was going to take. I had a miscarriage first, and then was fortunate enough to have my daughter. And then now I have a son as well. And, you know, I wasn't willing to compromise my value as far as my desire for a family for my business, because I just believed that there could be an and I also believed that while there's not a lot of women to ask for, like, hey, how did you do it when you were starting a family while starting a business, venture backed, like I luckily had a few conversations and was connected to some women who were very helpful and encouraging at that time in that moment for me, which just helped me kind of actually lean into it in a way to say, like, actually, what could I learn from this? And I'll tell you, one of the biggest learnings is I used to just like work. Like, you know, okay, I may not understand all of this, but I will just work my tail off. And so I'll figure it out. Like, I can't do that. I don't want to do that anymore. But guess what? Neither does my team. And like, maybe they don't have children, but they want to live their own life. And so like, I've had to think about like ruthless prioritization, like ruthless. And as you know so well, it's like constant being like, actually, what is the most important meetings? Actually, what do I need to be a part of? Actually, why is this still coming to me? Maybe we need to set up a different decision-making process. Maybe my team doesn't feel empowered to make these decisions if it's still coming up to me. Maybe I need to hire if people are feeling so strapped. Like, you know, thinking through those things. So the ruthless prioritization, but also the celebrating that everybody has their things in their life. And so whether it's like, maybe you don't have little kids, maybe you're taking care of a parent, maybe you just have other hobbies and interests in your life. And so I think that's made me a better leader to connect with my team as like a human. And that's kind of what we're in the business of doing, right? So, so that, I'd be lying to you if I said it hasn't been so hard and challenging, but I also do see that I've obviously reaped benefits of my amazing children, but learned a ton as a leader too.
That actually, one of my questions was going to be, like, do you have any advice for women who are like, you know, trying to start a business, have a young family, all that? And so like ruthless prioritization sounds like it's definitely the answer.
Well, that's for sure one of them. I'd say the other one, well, let me be really clear. Like, I don't think I'd feel authentic in saying that I have advice to give, because I'm in it. I'm in it. Anybody who's listening, like, I'm with you. Because it is constant. It's like, always kind of trying to like tweak and, review, like, okay, what worked well that week, what didn't work well, what systems are in place to support you doing what you want to do, again, like similar to hiring, like, what can I offload? Like, it's like, it's so tactical, but like, I don't love going to the grocery store. Why should I feel like I need to go to the grocery store? Let me just get groceries delivered, let me just offload that. So like systems and processes. But then, I mean, the big one too that I've benefited from is just the constant communication with my partner, my husband, who's so supportive of my career and who I am. And we've definitely had our challenges with just like juggling all of the various responsibilities and identities that we have, but just trying to circle back on that we're on the same team and having the clear communication as far as like expectations, who's doing what on the team and when, and how to support each other doing that. That's also just been super helpful to kind of take off my mental load, like expectations that I have either of myself or of him.
One of the best memories I have was when you wrote me an email once. You said, I'm working at night and I don't want to work at night. How can we make this better? And I was like, wow, because I've had multiple different clients and multiple like C-levels and people who just hustle and go. And I've never heard that. And I loved hearing that, because that's like what I was trying to probably put into my life as well. But like, I was like, okay, this is a challenge. How are we going to make this work? And it was so great to hear you like have that conviction to show that just because you have all these million things going on, if you don't want to work at night, you don't have to work at night. So how can you make it work for you that you get it done during the day?
Yeah. I'm
or
so
like
grumpy
whenever your zone of genius is. Yeah. I love
totally.
that.
And I'm not, and like, it's all individual. So like, it just is the, self-awareness, but I had enough times where I think I had like, I need to, like, I got to finish some things up. So I didn't get as much done today as I wanted, like that classic. Right. And I also like just realized that it would take me like 45 minutes to write like 2 sentences or something, like ridiculous. And yet if I just like went to sleep, had like a good start to my morning, I could like bang it out in like 30 seconds. So why was I killing myself to stay up? I wasn't at my best. I was like grumpy about it. It would like impact my sleep, which would then impact the next day. So yeah, it is one of those. It's interesting because you're kind of hitting on something that a lot of the power of coaching does too, which is just like kind of brings back the like control to you about your life. Like, sometimes we have these stories in our head, like, oh, but I need to, right? This was mine in that situation. I need to get back online to finish some things up. Because I had this story in my head of like certain timelines, deadlines, maybe what I thought a client was expecting to hear back from me, or maybe I was people pleasing and wanting to just be like, oh, on top of it for them. And just like challenging that. Do I? Is it needed? And I think when I like have challenged myself, it's when I then, and thankfully I have people like you to help hold me accountable to it and set up again the systems and processes to help me live that life that I want to live, to then just declare it. Like, I don't want to work at night. I don't want to. I don't like it. And I'm not at my best. And I face and other people face the repercussions, and it's not even my best work. And so just kind of like challenging that and putting it back into like, I control my, time and energy, is really, it's empowering in that way.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Can you tell us and the audience where they can find you online and if they want to connect with you?
valorperform.com. So it's Valor Performance, valorperform.com. And then also I'm on LinkedIn. So Sarah Milby. And they can reach me there too.
Great. Now I'm going to wrap up with our last question I ask every single guest. What is one philosophy, mantra, or quote that you try to run your business by?
I know what you think I'm going to say. And
Oh, are you going to
so
surprise me?
I'm going to surprise
curveball?
you. Yes. Yes. Kiri thinks I'm going to say carpe diem, which is a great one.
I think I actually had a guest say that.
It's a good one. It's sort of related that I still remind myself of is what would you do if you could not fail?
I like that.
What would
You are
do
like
if you
you're
could
a
not
quote
fail?
junkie. You send out a lot of quotes to the team. I love it.
And I send them to the team. I have them on bracelets. Yes.
What would you do if you could not fail?
Yeah. Yeah. Courage is grace under pressure is the other one that I wear on my bracelet. Because I'm a little obsessed with courage, as you know. But yeah, what would you do if you could not fail? And sometimes that just like at least for me, I like drop my shoulders and I'm like kind of more open to possibility, because sometimes I think we can all like hold ourselves back and think about like, yeah, but what if, oh, maybe not because, and so just kind of asking yourself, like, what would you do if you could not fail is like, oh, well, and you just have a little bit more openness to what you could do.
I like it. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking your time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Great chatting with you.
Thank you.